The psalm that we just read together, Psalm 111, just as a bridge thought this morning, while it's probably one of my favorite Thanksgiving psalms, one of the things that strikes me about it, while it makes a list of things that we ought to be grateful for, it also suggests that there is a connectedness of the body of believers gathering together in considering the list of reasons to be grateful. I don't know if you noticed it as we read it together a few moments ago, how many of the items on the list are intended to be thoughts for the corporate gathering to just contemplate together. Like, for example, in Psalm 11 and verse 1, the exhortation is given that we ought to give thanks to the Lord with all of our heart in the company of the upright and in the assembly. In other words, this was a hymn, a psalm that was sung primarily in corporate worship, whether around the temple or the tabernacle, or whether it was in the gathering of believers in the local community synagogues, even in the dispersion when the Jews were out of the land, and even when they were in the land, local gatherings, a time to pray. There's something that God understood as He designed us, something significant about the body meeting together that serves as challenge, inspiration, exhortation, warning, all kinds of blessings that come just in the corporate gathering. It's one of the reasons why when we gather, singing is so important to our gathering. It's one of the reasons why praying together is so important to our gathering. All of that works together in the preparation of our hearts, of the soil of our hearts for the truth of God. It's not one component apart from the rest. It's all of the components together that are critical and essential to our growth and maturity. It's the way God designed us. And it's what God designed worship to be really all about. And so the whole psalm is that way. Verse 2, when it calls us to ponder the greatness of God's works in our lives, it's not just God's work in my life, but it's God's work collectively in the lives of the body of believers that make up the community. And so as we share together testimonies of gratitude, we were not only responding, God, your goodness to me, but wow, God, your goodness to him, or God, your goodness to her, or God, your goodness in that situation or for that issue. And it widens the birth of our responsiveness, doesn't it? When the company of believers is giving thanks for God's majestic work and what He's accomplished. Or when we acknowledge that in verse 7, God reveals to us His precepts and His truth. We were reminded of God's truth as it applied to a number of us, not just as it applied to us. When we look at a verse like down in verse 9, God has sent redemption for His people. It's not just me thanking God that He provided Jesus for me and brought forgiveness of sin by repentance and faith, not just for me, but we were celebrating that collectively for all of us. God's saving grace, God's saving mercy. So it's a psalm that is intended for corporate worship, corporate praise, with the acknowledgement that the togetherness of God's people is important in our building up of each other. On the other side of the biblical spectrum, in the New Covenant, in the New Testament, it's probably one of the reasons why you find so many one another challenges in the New Testament, designed to do the same thing. For example, we're called to be at peace with each other, or to pursue peace with each other. That's a one another challenge. Or we're called to encourage each other, or we're called to forgive each other, or we are called to accept or embrace each other, or we are called to pray for each other, or we are called to love each other, or to serve one another, or to be devoted to each other, or to comfort each other, or to be hospitable toward each other. All of these are kind of one another admonitions. Why? Because there's something about the ministry and community of followers of Jesus that become a challenge to our walk in life. Remember back in the book of Hebrews, we looked at the 11th chapter. We spent a lot of time doing that. almost like one individual a week we spent, looking at the list of those in the Old Covenant historical book that were models of what real faith looked like. Even models of faith that came through hard times, that was faith expressed when things weren't always the best or even successful. Models of faith. It's not by accident that chapter is there to challenge Jewish followers of Jesus who are struggling in difficult circumstances, and it's not accidental that the very next words after the 11th chapter is complete, not only with a record of those from the history of time past, but also a challenge to remember those among them who were contemporaries when the book was written, who were also models of faith while they were going through hardship and persecution and trials. The very next words in Hebrews chapter 12, remember them? Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight or encumbrance, the sin which so easily besets us, and let us run the race with endurance, that race that's set before us. Why? Because it is the model following Jesus that inspires our walk. It is God meeting their needs that allows us to have encouragement or expectation that God's going to be there to meet my need. It is God's faithfulness to them in the hard times that allows me to hold on with assurance and confidence that I can trust the fact that God will be faithful to me in my crisis, in my walk. It is the one another example. So this morning, this Thanksgiving Sunday, I thought it would be appropriate for us to kind of wrap this series up on the Apostles' 12 very average men, to just do a kind of summary review, but in a different way. Let's reflect together some of the life principle lessons, some of them, that we can glean from their lives. Some of them learned some lessons about God's modeling or what he called us to be for each other. And we'll take a look at a few of those together as it's illustrated in a handful of these apostles. And hopefully, as we conclude this series, we will find that even though they walked 2,000 years ago, their model and example will be a challenge and an inspiration to us. So ready to do that? Here's one lesson. I think it's one of the most apparent that emerges from all 12 of these lessons of what Jesus really called us to be and that he himself models as well. And that is the lesson of servanthood. The apostles teach us what it means to be a faithful servant. And the very first apostle that Jesus called comes to my mind immediately. Remember in the list chronologically, a bit of a surprise from John chapter 1 verses 35 to 40. Anybody remember from way back the very first apostle that Jesus called? It wouldn't be the one we would expect if we were to be students of the rest of the Gospels and hadn't reviewed John chapter 1 first. The very first one that Jesus called, John the Baptist sent a few of the guys to Jesus, who was just about to begin to make his way on the scene. You remember the first one that John the Baptist sent? His name begins with the first letter in our alphabet. Andrew. Yeah, Andrew. Ironically, Andrew. The first that John the Baptist sends to follow Jesus. And then Andrew quickly runs and gets his brother, Peter. But Andrew's the first. And it's not long before, once he goes to get Peter and runs to Peter and said, listen, I found the Messiah. This is the real thing. Once Andrew makes his way in that scene, he pretty much quickly removes himself from the forefront and moves to a back seat. There's not a whole lot we find about Andrew in the gospel narratives, a couple of quick mentions of him, but obviously it's Peter's dominant leadership skills that take front and center stage, and Andrew very willingly surrenders a leadership role to his brother who had a stronger personality and leadership traits. Not only does he take it to his brother Peter, but remember we noted that the first four, Peter, Andrew, and who are the other two? James, and John. Boy, you guys were with it. Okay, I like this. This is encouraging. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. You find in the first four that for the most part, it's only three of them that are frequently mentioned together that Jesus is really zeroing in on, and that's Peter, James, and John. Frequently, Andrew isn't even mentioned with the other three. And we noted that Andrew kind of teaches us, on the one hand, the first shall be last. He was the first to be called, but he's last among the first four. But also maybe the last shall be first. Because in the end, what God calls us to is how to be a servant, how to follow him. And Andrew shows up for us in that category as a wonderful model of what servanthood really looks like. He was so willing to be in that role, so willing to take a back seat, so willing to serve quietly without requiring all kinds of attention or all kinds of recognition. He taught us how to serve. And he taught us, modeling early on what Jesus would make a centerpiece of his teaching and instruction. Remember the last week at the Passover? That last Passover? Remember what he did in action that would teach the ultimate principle of servanthood? At the Passover, what did he do? John records this for us in John chapter 13, when he took the servant's robe and he washed the feet of the disciples. And I know that there are some groups that kind of get lost in the act and miss the point. When he said that he did this to teach them and to challenge them to do likewise, he wasn't commanding them to be in a process of washing feet. He was commanding a principle that he modeled with the servant's robe in a servant's act. He was teaching them the principle of servanthood. The Son of Man, Jesus said, did not come to be served as a king, as a Messiah, but to serve. And how? By giving his life a ransom for many. Jesus modeled the ultimate principle of what it meant to be a servant. What it meant to be a servant is, it's not my life, it's yours. The surrendering of life. Modeled by Matthew. Remember when he first was called by Jesus in his tax collector booth? And Luke told us in Luke chapter 5 and verse 28, he left everything behind to follow Jesus. Matthew was ready to be a servant of Jesus. It would be a principle that even Peter, who we'll look at in a minute, as a leader would learn. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 21 and following, Peter reminds us much later the lesson that he's learned. Jesus gave us a model to follow in his steps. And the model was suffering willingly for righteousness' sake. And Peter actually tells us that that's the example we are called to follow as servants of his. It's all about servanthood. The Apostle Paul would much later write about that same principle in Philippians chapter 2. The familiar words in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. Don't merely look out for your own interests, but on the interest of others. It's all about servanthood. It's all about following. So when we think about the apostles, one of the first great lessons to grasp is a lesson about what it means to be a follower. What it means to really serve Jesus. I think of another one of the four who modeled that for us as well. He's the last group of four. In fact, he was the first name in the list in the last group of four. Here's a chance to be able to quiz ourselves since we've done so well. Remember back, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago, I'm not sure. But in the last four apostles, the one that always appeared first of the last four. Anybody know what his name was? He had a name that had to be contrasted with another in the first group who carried the same name. His name was James, the son of Alphaeus. Yeah. And we noted that while we could identify who he was in the lists, when we studied him, one of the things we picked up on was the fact that other than him being listed in the four lists: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He was completely incognito. There was absolute obscurity. We noted that when we studied James, the son of Alphaeus, there were no statements that he ever made that were recorded in the Gospels. There were no events that he was engaged or involved in that were cited in the Gospels. There was nothing that he did that was noteworthy enough, apparently, to include it in the Gospel narratives. But did that mean he was unimportant? Of course not. When Paul in Ephesians 2, verse 20 says that the apostles are the foundation of the church, Jesus being the chief cornerstone, James, the son of Alphaeus, is one of those stones. When in Revelation 21, the apostle John, in metaphor, speaks of the precious jewels in the heavenly city that are there to give attention and recognition to the apostles, James, the son of Alphaeus, is one of them. And just because we have no idea what he said, what he did, how he interacted with the 12, didn't mean he was insignificant. He just modeled in his obscurity what it means to be a servant. So if we're going to learn one lesson about the apostles that is most significant, maybe that lesson is to recognize that we are called to be his servants. Paul would write in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, I think in verse 2, Paul would say, it's really required of a servant of Jesus that we be found faithful. Not successful, not dominant, not in control, not out front, not gaining the attention of people, not always on the victory side, not always shouting a testimony of conquering, but that we be found faithful. Just trustworthy and reliable and dependable, and the kind of servant that just plods along and hangs in there and trusts the Lord in the difficult times, just to be faithful. So the 12 teach us about servanthood. Maybe going along with that, it would be noteworthy to consider that they not only teach us about servanthood, but they also teach us about what real leadership looks like. And when you think about leadership, who's the first of them that comes to mind, of especially the 11 of leadership, but Peter? Sure. And very early on, we kind of capture a glimpse of the fact that while Peter obviously had a lot of raw, natural personality traits and skill sets that prepared and equipped him to ultimately be a leader, we learn very quickly that it's not like as soon as you wave the magic wand and he shows up among the 12, that here is this dynamic, strong, well-equipped, well-prepared, successful leader, and there he is taking center stage. We learned pretty quickly, here was a guy who really needed a lot of time to mold, didn't he? A lot of time for those skills to be developed, for the rough edges to be chipped away. Leadership doesn't come just from natural giftedness or God-given character traits. Leadership is cultivated when the Spirit of God begins to do a work in the heart of a child of God and takes those implanted character traits and skill sets and really cultivates them. And doesn't Peter ever model for us what it means to be nurtured and cultivated? And it's early on when he comes to a place of commitment that this, raw leadership, know-it-all guy, remember, it's in Luke 5, they were out fishing. What else did Peter do? But he fished. Family business, lifelong fisherman, probably from the time he was young. Probably before he could swim, he was fishing. And there he is out fishing, and Jesus is there in the boat, and let's launch out. And Peter had come back in after fishing all night, caught nothing, bad day on the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus is a carpenter, his dad's a carpenter, didn't know much about fishing, shows up and says, let's go out. And here's Peter already flexing his leadership muscles, right? You kidding me? You got a lot of nerve. I'm the fisherman. You don't know anything about fishing. We've been out here all night. Bad night, no sense. We're beat, we're exhausted, going home, taking a nap, bug off. Now we're going out, going in the boat. We're going to go back. Okay, you insist. we go out. Remember what happened? It wasn't the only time this happened. Kind of happened at the beginning. It happened again at least one more time at the end with the last fish fry in 21 when they did it again. But remember that they get out there and they had to call in the reserves. They were catching in the nets. The boat was about to tip over. They had to bring out others, probably James and John, maybe Philip and Nathaniel had to come out with boats as well. And they're hauling in these huge nets of fish, and they're blown away. Peter kind of has a brief eye-opening moment, remember it? His first words were one of repentance. Remember what they were? It's in Luke chapter 5. Peter said, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." There was a recognition that for all of his raw skills and for all of his natural abilities, whether they were prominent in the fishing business or whether they were personality traits that God bred into his life, didn't mean he was going to be an automatic success. It really required the indwelling presence of God, the transforming work of God, and the molding of God to produce leadership. Depart from me, I'm a sinful man, O Lord. The good news for us is that wasn't the only time Peter had to cry out for God's mercy and forgiveness, right? It was a repeated issue. Over and over again, it shows up. At the Passover, when Peter tries to get in the way, "Hey, Lord, we're getting this all wrong. This isn't the way you celebrate the Passover. You don't wear the servant's robe. You don't wash feet. Somebody else has to be doing that." And Jesus has to correct him once again. Not to speak of the horrible when Jesus is taken and beaten and scourged. And 3 times over, Peter is in denial, only to be brought to brokenness and repentance again. Peter teaches us that leadership isn't just wound up in someone's natural skill sets and personality traits. If there isn't the presence of God, the Spirit of God, the molding of God, to really develop some of those raw natural gifts, there isn't leadership that's effective at all. Now, frankly, we should be able to see that in a non-biblical setting or a non-church setting or a non-spiritual setting. Because we look around us in our world and we see it in communities, we see it in business, we see it in military, we see it in politics, we see it in virtually every realm imaginable. That there are lots of people who obviously are leaders. It's one of the reasons they rise to the top. Sometimes they get there unscrupulously. Sometimes they get there by just stepping all over people and wanting to get there and at all costs, too bad. You're there, you're in my way, get out of my way, I'll stomp all over you and crush you to get to the top. Sometimes they get to leadership and they are immoral, untrustworthy, unreliable, incompetent buffoons. Sometimes they get there and it's all about them. Look at me, I'm so wonderful, I'm so powerful, I'm so great. Look at me, I rule, I reign, I tell you what to do, you do it. Right? And there's a lot of the epistles that speak to believers in Jesus who are leaders in business. A number of them in 1 Timothy and in 1 Peter, where there are challenges to believers who are leaders in business to be real careful that they've learned how to be effective leaders. Those who are lording it over those under their charge. Those who are abusive to those who work for them. Abusive to their slaves. Abusive to families. Abusive and just using them as nothing more than instruments to gain their own wealth or their own prestige or their own power. So we see that all around us. Utter incompetency at every level of life. It ought to be a reminder to us that if we will be fruitful and successful where God calls us to be, it's going to require the Spirit of God molding me into the servant he wants me to be, even a servant leader. Peter would take a long time to get there. Doesn't that encourage you and me? Don't you feel like it takes a long time for us to get there in whatever role God's called us to? It's a great encouragement. He finally kind of gets there. 1 Peter chapter 5, in his letter, he's talking about what real leadership looks like. Real eldering, real shepherding, pastoring, what it looks like. Not lording it over those who are there, but servant leadership. Peter teaches what it means to lead. So we look at the apostles, and we see lessons of servanthood, and we see lessons of leadership. How about another one? We can identify with this one. The apostles teach us appropriately what it means to be passionate. What it means to be passionate. In the healthiest sense of the term. And again, this is a lesson that's learned early on through some rough moments. Guess which brothers show up on the scene right now first that teach us what it means to be passionate. Among the first four that were called, Peter and Andrew, the other brother set were James and John. And remember, they kind of had a lot of emotional passion. Showed up pretty quickly, but not in a healthy way. Remember both guys, James and John, when the Samaritans weren't exactly responding the way that they would have liked to have seen the Samaritans respond? Remember what James and John are both doing? What are they doing? What are they saying? Burn this, like you call up the days of Elijah. Let's bring another holy fire. Yeah, okay, it's 1,000+ years later. Who cares? Another heaven's fire. Light the flame. Send out a lightning bolt. Burn this place to the ground. I don't want to get sidetracked, but frankly, it scares me when I hear a lot of that out of Christian circles today in the whole current event scene. Fry them all. Really scares me. Imbalance in thinking. Total imbalance of thinking. Totally lose sight of who Jesus is, who he came for, why he came, what he accomplished, and for whom. I don't want to go there because we'll get lost. You want me to take that to another level? We'll do that later. But they were passionate, right? Man, you can't imagine any more. And they were passionate about Jesus. You got to believe in him, and you got to embrace it. You burn the place to the ground. Passion. Probably not the kind of passion that Jesus wanted to see. Because what Jesus taught them over time was that even the hated Samaritans, he even came for them. You'd think they would have gotten it earlier because of what happened in the well of Sychar in the region of Samaria with the woman who was there and the men who came out and many who came to faith in Jesus as Messiah. You think they would have gotten it then. Or several other occasions with Samaritans when Jesus even taught a principle about caring and servanthood, and in his illustration, he uses not a Hebrew rabbi as an example of real compassion and caring, but of all, he uses a Samaritan. We just kind of know the term, right? The parable of the Good Samaritan. Think of what people group might have been included if that parable was told today. Think hard. Thinking's done. Passion. The same passion showed up in the same group later, and maybe it was a learned trait within the family, because we get insight in the gospel narratives. Remember this one in Matthew chapter 20, when it's James and John's mom who shows up on the scene with Jesus and says, you know, you're sitting down, it's Passover, okay, we're kingdom's coming soon. I think it would be really appropriate if Johnny and Jimmy were to sit near. James and let them, they ought to be right on one side of you, one on the other, because you love them so much. I think it would be wonderful if Jimmy and Johnny sat real close to you. Don't you think so? And maybe that's where they got their chutzpah from. But it was passionate all about themselves. All about their place and their recognition and their glory. And they're with Jesus. And so when the kingdom came, so they thought they would have high places. They were passionate about stuff. Yeah. Not the kind of passion Jesus was talking about. Not at all. But the passion changed later, didn't it? Remember John's passion, how it got transformed over the years? As he got much more mature, spiritually speaking, and God began to mold that passion in a real sense, what did John write about more than any of the other apostles in his gospel and in his 3 letters? But all about God's passion and his love for believers and for lost people. He kind of got it at the end, right? He's all about love. All through the gospel, God so loved the world. He kind of got it. Greater love has no one than this, than one lay down his what? Life. John 15, for his friends. All about love. John couldn't even name himself in his gospel. Written some maybe 30 years, 40 years later after the resurrection. He's so humbled by God's passion and love for him that he wouldn't even refer to his own name in the Gospels, but no less than 6 times we noted in John's Gospel when he speaks of himself, never by name, it's always what? I am the disciple that Jesus loved. I'm so overwhelmed, so amazed, so blown away that he would love me for all of my garbage and all of my filth and all of my selfishness and all of my sinfulness and all that's misplaced and all that's filthy. He would love me? Whoa. Boy, he started to get it, didn't he? In his letters, he wrote all about it too. 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 and following. Real love comes from God. Brethren, we're to love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God. We love him because he first loved us. It all comes from John. See what happened? God just started to mold that passion in a radically different way, didn't he? And he wants to do that in your life and mine as well. And James, talk about passion being molded. I mean, this is the guy that we don't know a whole lot about in the gospel narratives, but we definitely see a change in passion at the end. Remember his last reference in the scriptures? We noted it when we talked about him. It's in the book of Acts in the 15th chapter. When his passion for Jesus is so great that the other Herod, a descendant of the one who was reigning when Jesus was on the scene, when the other Herod was so threatened by the growth of the church and the influence of the apostles, that in rage he set out to kill them. Remember the 2 that he set out to kill? Peter made sense because he's the chief leader, but who's the other one who ultimately is killed? It's this James. He becomes the first of the apostles to be martyred. Why? Because I've heard every sermon preached or see him active. He is at the top of the food chain of the apostles in preaching and teaching about Jesus, who he is and what he did for us. And he was passionate enough to die for Jesus gladly. They teach us about passion. And so we have lots of references about passion in the scriptures. But before I cite another reference, we got to bring in here another apostle of passion. Didn't forget him, but we want to certainly include him. When you think about an apostle of passion, we don't know a lot about him. We just know who he was and the world he came from. So we can imagine the kind of passion he brought to the table. Know who I'm thinking about? He's in that last group of 4 again. Not a whole lot of space except for his name and identity and his background. We don't want to forget the fun guy. We'll want to meet him and chat with him in glory. I think it'd be a fun guy to get connected to. Don't you think so? Who am I talking about? Simon the Zealot. He's the radical, right? The political radical. Part of that undercover group that did some kind of terrorist acts and did all kinds of stuff. They had a political agenda to perform. And man, talk about somebody being radically changed. I just think it's blessed. I mentioned it several times that when Jesus early on sent the 12 out in pairs as a kind of test run for evangelism for the future, remember that Simon the Zealot is paired off with Judas Iscariot. Man, I still wonder. I wonder what Judas thought about this guy. In our contemporary culture, Judas would have looked at Simon and said, here's a real Jesus freak. Passion. But all of that passion was transferred with a new vision, because he realized it wasn't going to be about a kingdom here or politics here or governmental change here. That wasn't going to cut it. It wasn't going to produce the kind of transformation that God was producing or that Jesus came for. It was all about spiritual transformation and heart transformation that no governmental system will ever produce. And it would all be about Jesus and what he did. Can you imagine the passion of his preaching? I wish we had some sermons that were included in the book of Acts. But we can sure grasp it. Passion. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 12, verse 11, when he's addressing believers in Jesus, and he's challenging us to reflect what real servanthood looks like, what a real surrendering to Jesus looks like, what it looks like to give our lives to him as a living, holy sacrifice, in our relationships with each other, in our ministry together. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 11, here is one brief admonition and a whole series of challenges. Paul said, we are to be fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. There's a challenge. Talk about being passionate. Fervency, excitement. In our spirit, that's not the Holy Spirit. Fervent in your spirit, in your heart, in your soul. Real fervency, real commitment, real excitement about serving the Lord. Whether it's serving the Lord in ministry to each other or serving the Lord in reaching lost people, there ought to be passion about it. Why? Why should we be excited or passionate? Because there is no greater life to live and no greater message to communicate. There is nothing of value that we do or have in life that would ever compare with what we have in Jesus, who he is and what he's done for us. Passion. These guys teach us about serving, leading, and passion. How about another one? They teach us about the absolute foundation and priority of the importance of the Word of God and Scripture. And for that lesson, go back to John chapter 1 and see if you remember with me these next two that are called after Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Remember the two who show up after them? The first one that Jesus actually personally pursued and personally asked to follow him, Philip. And Philip gets his best buddy, Nathanael. And you remember when Philip responds and follows Jesus. When Philip in John chapter 1 verse 45 reaches out to Nathanael, remember those words? We spent some time kind of cultivating this one. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. They had been students studying the scrolls carefully. They've been hearing John the Baptist preach about the Messiah, who he would be, the prophecies that would be fulfilled. But they weren't just taking it in because John was teaching it. They decided to unravel the scrolls for themselves and find out whether or not it was true. They are the forerunners of the Bereans in Acts chapter 17, of whom our church is named. Remember them in Acts 17:11. They examined the scriptures daily to see whether or not what they were being preached and taught was the truth. They were requiring the preaching of Paul to stand in agreement with the teaching of the scriptures. That's exactly what Philip and Nathanael did. They were examining the scrolls because John the Baptist was pointing to Jesus as the Messiah who fulfilled Old Testament scripture. So they unraveled the scrolls and they looked at the portions that John the Baptist may well have been quoting from to find out, do the scrolls really teach this? So when Philip went to Nate and said, this is who I'm following, this is who Peter and Andrew and James and John are also following, you got to join us because we found the one that Moses wrote about in the law, the 5 books of the law, and the prophets spoke about. And this Jesus, the son of Joseph, the guy who lives in Nazareth, is the Messiah. We're convinced. What convinced Philip was the Scripture. He was searching there, and so was Nathanael searching there. We noted the same in verse 48. When Jesus had a little conversation with Nathanael in John 1 verse 48, Nathanael said to him, well, how do you know who I am? And Jesus said, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. And we noted that it was commonplace in the culture that in the place of cool in the midst of the day, that Hebrew men would gather together in that place under the fig tree to discuss the Scriptures, to discuss the scrolls. It would be a time of afternoon Bible study. Many times the local rabbis would be there as well, but the elders of the community would be there as well. It was a time for nourishing and feeding on truth, and likely that's where Philip was, and that's what he was doing. Maybe some more testing, maybe some more looking. Maybe he's taking in what Philip said, and he's testing it as well. Philip's saying it, John the Baptist is saying it, maybe it's true, there he is. They model for us the absolute priority of the Word of God in our lives. Peter got it. 1 Peter chapter 2, right? Desire the pure milk of the Word that you might grow thereby. His last words for us in 2 Peter 3:18, last words in the letter are those, grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ. Or the words of Jesus himself in John chapter 8, verse 31, you will know truth, and the truth will set you free. Or in Jesus' prayer in John 17, when he prays for us, Father, sanctify us by your truth. Your word is truth. It's all about truth. All about the Word of God. Paul would say, study to show yourself approved unto God. It's all about truth. So the apostles model for us truth. It became one of Jesus' first sermons in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, verse 6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That's how you'll be filled. That's how you'll be satisfied. Mm-hmm. So here they are. These average guys. As the Lord molds them, they teach us what it means to be a servant, what it means to be a leader, what it means to be passionate, what it means to hunger for the truth and be molded by it. One last thought and we quit. What they teach us all the way through, they teach us the value of struggling in our faith. They teach us the value of struggling in our faith. Didn't all of them struggle? Peter, man, did he struggle. It was a battle, wasn't it? And frankly, sometimes in the struggle, it was pretty ugly. It was gross failure, horrific sin. James and John, big time, blowing it, right? Burn down the city. We want to be at the top of the food chain in reign. We want to wear crowns. We want to be important. All about them. They struggled. When we think about the apostles struggling with faith and struggling with following, who's the one who rises to the top? We haven't mentioned him yet as a model. Remember Thomas? In that second group, remember Thomas? Boy, there were lots of times when he manifested a lot of fear. They were starting to threaten Jesus. He was fearful about what would happen to him. A lot of fear there. A lot of lack of understanding and concern. Jesus is teaching about heaven in John 14, the end. And Thomas is, I don't get it. I don't understand this way stuff, road stuff. And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That was in response to Thomas's question. And, of course, his big moment of struggle, remember it? Even after the resurrection. The other guys are yelling and screaming and dancing and shouting and jumping all over the place. Thomas wasn't there when it happened, and Jesus shows up a week later. Not to beat him over the head, not to scold him, not to crush him, not to attack him, not to call him a failure, a loser, not to cast him away. But Jesus simply did what he did with the others when he showed them his hands, his side, his feet. They struggle. Just like you and me. 12 average men. Molded by God, the Spirit of God, transformed by the work of God in their lives. They model for us what following Jesus will begin to look like over time. How to serve Him, for those who lead, how to be faithful leaders. The importance of being passionate, the importance of the Word of God, the importance of recognizing that even the struggles in life are a struggle designed to produce our growth. Even Judas teaches us, doesn't he? The warnings of unbelief, masquerading spirituality, they all teach us lessons about life. I am so thankful, I hope you are, that God puts people in our lives with a design. Puts people in our lives. People who are there to challenge us, to warn us, to exhort us, to encourage us, to sharpen us. People. Some we just find in the record of history, but we can get to know them closely like these guys. Important it's been, huh? Some are in our lives right now, like the believers in Hebrews, book of Hebrews, who struggled, and they had lots of models around them of those who were handling the persecutions. And so it is for us. We have the biblical narrative with models to follow and be encouraged by. And we also have right here one another, don't we? Aren't you thankful that God puts people in our lives for a purpose? We are here to support each other, to exhort each other, sometimes to lovingly be in the face of each other. To say, you really don't want to do that, do you? Come on, you don't. No, you don't. Come on, I love you. You don't want to do that. You don't want to get there. And sometimes, in our struggle in the hard times, to teach somebody else what it's going to be like when they get there. Do you ever notice in the journey that when you're going through the good times and somebody else is struggling, sometimes along the journey the roles get reversed? He designed us for each other. Aren't you glad? Here are the 12 who teach us, to remind us that we teach each other. We exhort each other. So let's be thankful not only to Him, to the Lord, for what He's done for us, but let's be thankful for these 12 average guys. And let's be thankful for us. We're just kind of average Joes and Josephines, aren't we? All on the journey together. But it's a good place to be. Let's pray. Lord, as we thank You for who You are and what You've done, may we be grateful to You for all You've accomplished for us. Grateful to You for placing one another in our lives to be that source of inspiration and exhortation as well. As we give thanks with grateful hearts in Jesus' name. Amen.